Over to you, Thomas.
I'm Thomas, and my project is the role of social biases in the collection of local ecological knowledge on Malapascua Island. And we'll just go ahead and jump right in. So, what is local ecological knowledge? The inclusion of LEK in conservation decisions is part of a suite of participatory and socially minded conservation methods. And while LEK has no accepted definition, mainly because it encompasses a diverse range of cultures and practices, it typically emphasizes the practical skills and wisdom developed through people's lived experiences. Though sometimes controversial, these practices can be an effective alternative where conventional approaches have fallen short, such as understanding complex and long-term changes in large areas. The inclusion of socially oriented methodologies has led to more interdisciplinary methods. This also means conservationists using these approaches need to be aware of social science issues such as bias. When using tools like surveys or questionnaires, bias can invalidate responses by introducing social pressures that influence how participants respond. In the 80s, the Philippines decentralized its resource management, given local governments much control over conservation resource management. The Philippines has since become one of the leading proponents of community-based methods in Southeast Asia. LEK has also been used in the Philippines for conservation goals. Cross-cultural studies in the Philippines have identified bias and response patterns tied to cultural traits. Traits like collectivism and uncertainty avoidance make biases like acquiescence bias more prominent. Acquiescence is a tendency to agree regardless of content and can manifest in several ways. Acquiescent behaviors can also be influenced by the interviewer, as participants may be socially pressured to respond in certain ways, which is known as social desirability, or may seek to provide responses they believe align with expectations, behavior known as satisficing. This becomes important in a Filipino context as many foreign organizations play roles in facilitating, funding, and directing community-based projects in the Philippines. These organizations range from small-scale NGOs to large-scale international development agencies, and have participated in everything from helping ecotourism to establishing marine protected areas. Given that foreign agencies play a role in many participatory projects, understanding these biases can impact the efficacy of their community-based methods. Yet little research has been done into the impact of these biases within a marine social conservation context in the Philippines. Thus, the goals of this study are twofold. One, how do response biases impact the gathering of quantitative LEK by a foreign researcher compared to a local surveyor using survey techniques on Malapascua Island? And two, how does LEK gathered from Malapascua's local diving community about perceived thresher shark abundances compare to ecological data gathered by the Thresher Shark Research and Conservation Project, TSRCP? For the study site, Malapascua Island is a small island of about 6,000 residents located off the northern tip of Cebu. Before the 1980s, the island supported itself primarily through small-scale fisheries, though Malapascua's community is now dependent on the dive tourism industry. The industry was founded upon the discovery of Monad Shoal as a premier dive site in the Philippines. Monad Shoal supports communities of cleaner wrasse at reef cleaning stations that feed on the ectoparasites of visiting elasmobranchs, including thresher sharks. These cleaning interactions are important for the health of these sharks, and the regularity of their visits in the morning is the foundation of Malapascua's dive industry. This is the only known nearshore location in the world where thresher sharks can be consistently observed. Malapascua is also home to several community-based NGOs focusing on conservation, including TSRCP, which acted as the host organization for this study. For the ecological collection part of this study, underwater stationary visual censuses were conducted during December of each year from 2015 to 2019 by TSRCP. Censuses were conducted at Monad Shoal's 4 main cleaning stations each morning. Dive teams recorded the size, sex, and duration of each thresher shark visit to Monad cleaning stations. For the survey, a modified social network analysis was conducted with the dive community to identify the stakeholders who interact with thresher sharks most directly. The analysis identified boat crew members, dive guides, dive instructors, and dive operators as the most optimal participants. It also found that dive shops operate as the social hubs for these communities. 26 dive shops were identified on Malapascua Island, and each was approached to recruit participants for the study. In total, using lists provided by the dive shops and from available rosters, A targeted recruitment list of approximately 220 total participants was collated. Follow-up visits were scheduled with the dive shops to administer the surveys. The survey was designed to collect community perceptions of thresh shark abundances on Monad Shoal during the diving high seasons from 2009 to 2019. The survey was translated into Cebuano and administered electronically via tablets. In total, it was designed to take approximately 10 minutes. The abundance perception questions were the core of this. Participants were asked to estimate their perception of relative abundance using a slider bar, seen here. Holistic judgments for each year. The scale consisted of an extreme low, which was labeled wala, or none, and an extreme high, labeled daghan kaayo, which is very many, with a center point labeled tunga tunga, which is middling or average. A hidden scale of 0 to 100 was mapped to the slider bar, allowing the position of the bezel to be quantified for analysis. The survey team consisted of the researcher, a local surveyor, and a local assistant to help with the logistics and communication. The targeted recruitment list was systematically divided between the researcher and the local surveyor, and participants were interviewed separately during dive shop visits. Surveys were conducted fully in Cebuano. So for the results, in total, 107 participants were interviewed. The first analysis examined the patterns in how individual participants responded, such as in tendency to respond, I don't know, or to answer all questions homogenously. These patterns were then compared between the researcher and the local surveyor. However, the only pattern that was different was in the tendency to respond, I don't know, for all questions, which was significantly greater for the raw outputs from the slider scales were binned into ordinal rankings of 1 through 10. Median rankings for the researcher for all years ranged between 6 and 7, while the median rankings for all years was 6 for the local surveyor. Both are also extremely homogeneous, centered around a middling point, and with no upwards or downwards trends. Ordinal regressions of participant responses were modeled with cumulative link models and analyzed using analysis of deviance. The surveyor, job class, and age class factors all returned significant p-values. Importantly, the factors of year, ecological data represented by the census, and interaction terms were not significant. An interaction plot of this model shows the differences in responses for the local surveyor and for the researcher, which were higher. It also shows the impacts of specific demographic groups, like the 41 to 50 age group, which were also higher, and the boat crew job class, which was lower. For the second research question, the ecological data collected from the shark census was relatively stable between 2015 and 2019. There were no significant differences between 2015 and 16 and between 2017 and 2019. The only change was between 2016 and 17, which showed an increase in observations. When these results are compared to the survey responses, they are very similar. Both sets of data are stable and lack any upward or downward trends. However, the survey data lacks the increase observed in the census data. So overall, there is very little difference in response patterns. It was expected that social desirability with the researcher would have an effect on I don't know responses, and the lack of this effect at first suggests that foreign interviewer effects may be minimal. However, the significant difference in all I don't know responses between the researcher and the local surveyor is important. The 15% all I don't know responses for the researcher are non-substantive, essentially shrinking the researcher sample size by 15%. It may also be a defensive behavior, indicating a lack of trust. And this is supported by field observations. Participants often voiced a preference to be interviewed by the local surveyor or expressed fears that there would be repercussions for wrong answers. While only some participants expressed these doubts, it is likely they are more wide-held and not voiced. The one-sided appearance of this behavior indicates a strong interview effect, as the presence of the researcher either induced these feelings more strongly or participants felt less comfortable voicing their concerns. Modeling corroborated a significant quantitative difference in responses between the researcher and the local surveyor. However, this bias was relatively weak. The researchers' responses were higher on average by only 1 ordinal ranking across all years and demographic groups. This matches expectations of greater acquiescent behavior and social desirability with a foreign interviewer. Higher abundance responses may be seen as better and more desirable. And the higher responses for the researcher indicate a positive social desirability for the interviewer. While its effect was minimal here, this may have a greater impact on other studies which collect more quantitatively significant data. More important was the overall homogeneity of the data. 30% of all participants gave homogeneous responses, and the average survey data across all years was extremely homogeneous and middling. While culturally acquiescent responses tend to be middling, the survey tool may have played a greater role in shaping these responses. Quality answers require optimization, a cognitive process of evaluating, synthesizing, and relaying information. Satisficing is a cognitive shortcut of some of these steps to provide a response that appears plausible with minimal effort. Strong middling responses tend to be an indication of this. This occurs when participants have little motivation, when the difficulty of the task is high, or when the participant's ability to answer is low. The survey could have created these conditions, as forming holistic impressions of abundance across a long time frame is cognitively difficult. Additionally, if concerns about the study were pervasive among participants, underlying distrust would give little motivation for participants to optimize. Given that this homogeneity of responses was present regardless of satisficing appears to be a stronger concern than interviewer bias. The second aim of this study was to compare the abundance perceptions collected in the survey to the Thresher census data collected by TSRCP. Both sets of data appear similar in their stability and lack of trends. However, the presence of strong satisficing makes it difficult to determine if this survey data truly reflects the community's perceptions. This is supported by the fact that ecological census data had no significant impact on participant responses in the model. This, in combination with the participant response patterns, suggests that social pressures such as satisficing may have shaped their responses more than their experiences or their perceptions. Thus, while the trends of the two data appear very similar, caution should be used using this survey data in conservation decisions. The most important takeaway from this study is that foreign interviewer biases were present on Malapascua, but their impacts were marginal compared to using this method will likely not elicit substantive LEK, which means data collected this way is not helpful in conservation decisions, and as such, foreigners using these models as part of a participatory framework are not truly including local voices or perspectives. More effective community integration, particularly in building rapport with stakeholders, is recommended. This will help reduce distrust and ensure that projects are more thoroughly understood and accepted by the community. This should reduce satisficing and non-responsive behaviors. However, this is a time and resource-intensive approach and may not be available to foreign researchers and organizations. Changes in the method may also be effective. While structured interview protocols created conditions which likely induce satisficing, unstructured or semi-structured approaches can circumvent this. Methods favoring knowledge co-production, which include knowledge holders at every level of the study, can help reduce the researcher-local dichotomy. Methods like the nominal group technique can help build projects that benefit communities and are not purely extractive. Using interdisciplinary teams to ensure social methods are properly applied and using local team members wherever possible can also help mitigate biases. And while these recommendations are important for researchers and organizations working on Malapascua, these considerations may be even more critical when working in more remote Filipino communities with less exposure to foreigners. So, in conclusion, foreign interviewer bias was present, but structurally induced satisficing was stronger. It's difficult to determine the reliability of the LEK. Structured surveys were likely not the best method for interviewing Malapascua's community. And more participatory methods are recommended for gathering local ecological knowledge and involving the community more in conservation decisions. So thank you very much for listening. Thank you to the Thresher and Conservation Research and Conservation Project, my supervisors, Simon Oliver and Jacopo Seri, and also to all of my friends and family who supported me through this. Thank you.